Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia is a foundational work of political philosophy that engages with questions of justice, individual rights, and the role of the state. Published in 1974, the book presents a libertarian theory of the state, in contrast to John Rawls's more egalitarian theory, which was published 2 years earlier. Nozick challenges the notion of redistributive justice and argues in favor of a minimal state that exists solely to protect individual rights. The book has had a profound influence on contemporary political thought, particularly within libertarian and classical liberal circles. Its central arguments revolve around the relationship between individual freedom and state power, and the moral limits of governmental intervention in the lives of citizens. The historical context and philosophical background. In the mid-20th century, Western political philosophy was dominated by the debate between two major political ideologies, liberalism and conservatism. At the heart of this debate was the issue of the role of the state in the lives of individuals. In 1971, John Rawls published his influential book A Theory of Justice, which proposed a new vision of justice based on fairness, equality, and the veil of ignorance. Rawls argued that a just society is one in which inequalities are arranged to benefit the least advantaged members of society. This idea of redistributive justice was widely debated in academic circles. Nozick, who was influenced by the classical liberal tradition, offered a radically different perspective in Anarchy, State, and Utopia. While Rawls's theory was focused on promoting equality and fairness, Nozick argued that individual freedom and property rights are the most important aspects of a just society. His theory is rooted in the idea of self-ownership, meaning that individuals have absolute ownership over their bodies and the fruits of their labor. According to Nozick, any form of taxation or redistribution of wealth beyond that which is necessary for the protection of individual rights is morally unjust. The minimal state. One of the key arguments in Anarchy, State, and Utopia is the concept of the minimal state. Nozick argues that the state should be limited to the protection of individuals from force, theft, fraud, and the enforcement of contracts. This minimal state, which Nozick refers to as the night watchman state, exists solely to protect the basic rights of its citizens, including property rights and personal security. The state is justified in using force only to the extent necessary to uphold these rights, but it should not interfere with individuals' voluntary transactions or choices. Nozick's minimal state stands in contrast to the more expansive welfare states that emerged in the 20th century, which redistribute wealth in an effort to promote social justice. Nozick critiques these welfare states as coercive and unjust. He argues that individuals are entitled to the fruits of their labor and that taxation beyond the minimum required for the state to function is a form of forced labor. In essence, Nozick believes that any attempt to redistribute wealth is a violation of individuals' rights to self-ownership and property. He challenges the idea that the state has a moral obligation to provide for the needs of the less fortunate through wealth redistribution, the entitlement theory of justice. At the heart of Nozick's political philosophy is his entitlement theory of justice, which provides a framework for understanding how wealth and resources should be distributed in a just society. The entitlement theory is composed of three main principles: justice in acquisition, justice in transfer, and rectification of injustice. These principles outline the conditions under which individuals can acquire and transfer property, as well as how to address injustices that may arise in the distribution of resources. The first principle, justice in acquisition, deals with how individuals can justly acquire property. Nozick argues that individuals have the right to acquire property through their labor and by mixing their labor with natural resources. This is similar to the Lockean theory of property, where an individual has a right to claim ownership of previously unowned resources by exerting effort on them. The second principle, justice in transfer, states that property can be justly transferred from one individual to another through voluntary exchange, without violating anyone's rights. If property is acquired and transferred according to these principles, Nozick argues, then the distribution of wealth is just, regardless of the outcome. The third principle, rectification of injustice, addresses how to deal with situations where property has been acquired or transferred unjustly. If someone acquires property through theft or fraud, for example, the state has a duty to rectify the injustice and restore the property to its rightful owner. However, Nozick emphasizes that the state's role in rectifying injustice should be limited to correcting past wrongs, rather than using coercion to achieve some broader social or economic goal, such as wealth redistribution. Utopia and the idea of the experience machine. One of the most provocative sections of Nozick's book is his discussion of utopia and the limits of state power. Nozick rejects the idea that a perfect society can be achieved through state intervention or the imposition of a particular vision of the good life. Instead, he argues that individuals should be free to pursue their own conceptions of happiness and fulfillment, as long as they do not violate the rights of others. In this sense, Nozick's Utopia is one of minimal state intervention and maximal individual freedom. In one of the most famous thought experiments in Anarchy, State, and Utopia, Nozick introduces the concept of the experience machine. The experience machine is a hypothetical device that can simulate any experience one desires, making people feel as if they are living their ideal lives. However, the experiences are artificial, and the person is actually living in a simulated reality rather than in the real world. Nozick asks whether people would choose to plug into the experience machine, knowing that they would no longer have any real agency or control over their lives. Nozick argues that most people would reject the experience machine because they value more than just pleasurable experiences. They also value reality, authenticity, and the ability to make meaningful choices. This thought experiment serves to highlight Nozick's belief that human beings are not merely pleasure-seeking creatures but have a deeper need for autonomy and self-determination. For Nozick, true fulfillment comes from living in accordance with one's own values and making meaningful choices, even if those choices involve hardship or struggle. Criticisms of Nozick's theory. Nozick's theory of justice has been subject to significant criticism from various political philosophers. One of the primary criticisms is that Nozick's entitlement theory is overly permissive of inequality. Critics argue that Nozick's theory allows for the creation of vast disparities in wealth and resources, as long as they arise from voluntary transactions. This is problematic, according to critics, because it fails to address issues of social justice and the inherent power imbalances that exist in society. For example, if a wealthy individual acquires resources through unjust means, such as exploiting workers or engaging in discriminatory practices, Nozick's theory does not provide a strong framework for rectifying these injustices. Additionally, Nozick's rejection of redistributive justice is seen by many as a failure to account for the role of the state in promoting the welfare of its citizens. Critics argue that the state has a responsibility to provide for the needs of the less fortunate, particularly in societies where inequality is rampant. They contend that Nozick's minimal state offers too little protection for those who are disadvantaged and that a more active role for the state is necessary to ensure that all individuals have access to basic goods and services, such as healthcare and education. Legacy of Nozick's work. Despite the criticisms, Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia remains an influential and widely read text in political philosophy. His defense of individual rights, the minimal state, and the entitlement theory of justice have resonated with libertarians and classical liberals who advocate for limited government intervention in the lives of citizens. Nozick's emphasis on personal freedom and his skepticism toward state power continue to shape debates on issues such as taxation, welfare, and government regulation. In addition to its influence on political theory, Anarchy, State, and Utopia also had a profound impact on broader intellectual discussions. The book was a key text in the revival of libertarian thought in the late 20th century and contributed to the intellectual climate that led to the rise of conservative and libertarian movements in the United States. Nozick's work also influenced discussions in ethics, moral philosophy, and the philosophy of law. Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia offers a powerful defense of individual rights, self-ownership, and the minimal state. Through his entitlement theory of justice, Nozick provides a framework for understanding how wealth and resources should be distributed in a just society. His rejection of redistributive justice and his emphasis on individual freedom have made the book a cornerstone of libertarian philosophy. While his ideas have been subject to significant criticism, particularly regarding inequality and social justice, Nozick's work remains a critical touchstone for anyone interested in the relationship between individual liberty and state power.